All right. Hello. Good morning. So I'm having actually Easter vacation, and I'm not feeling too well actually. Both kids has been sick. I think I got the same. Thinking it's Corona, but yeah, I don't know. Tested negative. So, but I'm feeling okay, and I really wanted to do a stream, so that's why we're here. And I thought we could talk about, because I had a session with the team, because we've been exploring state machines in the new CodeSandbox projects, and we wanted to explore kind of the core of it from the perspective of just the reducer, and not like add any existing like big state machine abstraction on top, but see how we could actually make this work, referencing the video I made on explicit states. So we have learned a ton of stuff through that. At some point it was very much like a reducer tool, and then suddenly it felt quite frameworky. We started adding some patterns prematurely, and so on and so on. But now we did a session. We talked about it, and it made me realize what the tool should really be, and that is exactly it. It should be a tool. It shouldn't be a framework. But it's also the concept that React States exposes, not just this reducer concept of explicit states. It also has this concept of an environment interface, and this pattern of mounting your application in in the environment, like in your environment interface kinda. And then instead of using promises, you actually emit events from the environment. And all of this is kind of tied together. But I didn't one of the really nice feedback I got from that session is it shouldn't feel like you have to do this stuff. It should really feel like a very basic tool, and then we can simplify this additional stuff. So what I thought we could do, I'm just going to briefly look at the documentation now, and then we're going to do a refactor of the Excalibur Firebase project. So I'm considering this like a release candidate so that we can kind of settle this. And we have some more stuff we need to do internally to start using the latest API. But the cool thing is we can actually use the new API and the old API and gradually move over, because at the core it really is just a reducer. Anyways, so what React States is, it is this reducer. Maybe I should even write that. Explicit states reducer. Yes. It's an explicit states let's put a capital R. Explicit states reducer. So instead of just having a bunch of state in the reducer, you're explicit about what different states can it be in. And again, referencing to the video, we should actually do that here. YouTube, React States, Christian, if only. There we have it. Let's put that in here. Explaining explicit states, because it's a nice video explaining what it's all about. How was this? Markdown, YouTube, what's it called? What's it called? YouTube thumbnail, that's the image. There's a special link here, you see. Yes, let's see. So if we do this, your YouTube vid. Is it like this? Let's try this. No, that wasn't it. Is it just this maybe? No. What's the... Is this the... Let me share. I think maybe there's a... No, this should be the... The fridge. YouTube video ID here. Yeah, it should be the whole thing. That's weird. I thought that should work. Or did I? Oh, did I type it wrong here? Oh. No. Was it the... Oh. Oh, you can do... Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. I have to do... So it's like this. Yeah, let's see. Sorry. We do it like that. React states, something like that. There we go. Oh, and I guess our... Oh, this is interesting. I think this is... No, wait, like this. Sorry. There we go. Yes. So the point of this explicit states reducer is that you're explicit about what state the reducer can be in. And by doing so, you avoid these really weird typings of you always have to check a lot of values to figure out what state you are in. Well, now you have this explicit state property and the related values to being in that state. The really good thing is that all state changes and effects are actually guarded. So it's not the outside world telling the reducer when to change the state. The outside world is asking the reducer to change some state. And it's the logic within the reducer that decides what should happen, including side effects. So that means also that the outside world doesn't like call a callback, which does some data fetching and then tells the reducer to update. It actually dispatches into the reducer that it wants to fetch some data. And then the reducer decides if it's time to do that. And when you use this with a context provider, you can actually just expose the reducer as the value of the context, which means that you don't have this complexity of, because everything's a dispatch, you don't have this complexity of a context provider holding a reducer and functions to run side effects that later does dispatching. Like everything starts with a dispatch, so you don't have that complexity of making sure the callbacks doesn't change, and you need to do a lot of memo stuff to optimize the reconciliation. And then we have the match utility, which allows you to point to any state of any of these reducers, and it gives you an exhaustive match on all the states, making sure that whenever you change the states, you will be warned in the UI if you're not covering one of them. And then we have the optional part. So this reducer is just a reducer, and you can use that. If that's the only thing you want to use it for, you can do that. But then you can take a step further and you can introduce an environment interface. And this is not specific to React states. This is just a really good way to do programming. We're not quite used to do it in JavaScript, but in other languages, it's very typical that you create interfaces for everything the application interacts with, so that you can more easily test and so on. Instead of like creating interfaces for like explicitly for all the different things the application wants to interact with, it's just one bigger environment interface so that you can consume it through a single hook. And the thing that it helps you with is that this environment interface is specific to the application needs. It's not like you have a bunch of APIs in the browser, you have a bunch of NPM packages that does very generic stuff, but this interface, you design this interface to the needs of the application. Another thing it helps you with is that there's no like magical strings like doing data fetching or other stuff, and the interface, as I said, is perfectly tailored for your application. And the really nice thing is that you can now take the application code itself and you can just insert a different environment. So you do implementations of these environments where like the typical one is the browser, but you can implement one for running on the server side, running in native. You can even have like a sandbox or proof of concept environment where you just build out the app first and then later you go and implement the actual browser version of it, which makes it much easier to just test out stuff. Like, how should your application actually work with this new set of features? You can explore that API, how it consumes it, and all this stuff. And then we have the environment events, which is tied into this environment interface, which I'll show you. And here, every single implementation in this interface can emit events. So think of the environment as an event emitter, and any of the implementations in the environment interface, they can use this event emitter to emit events. And that means that you don't return promises when you, for example, fetch data or do other things. You actually rather emit an event. And now we're kind of going full circle on this, because the only reason that works is because we're using explicit states in our reducers. Because what this actually means is that whenever you use one of these reducers created from the environment, I'll show you that later, it will actually automatically receive any event coming from the environment. You don't have to link this stuff together anymore. You just create a reducer, and when you define it, you will have access to all the events coming from the environment. And the reason this works is because if you were to have a normal reducer, it will kind of, well, I guess of course it would work there as well, but in this case, like it would be the environment telling the reducer to update every time, right? If the reducer was interested in an event from the environment, it would just deal with it. But since we have explicit states, there are only certain scenarios it expects to get these events. And you might think like it's crazy that every single one of these reducers gets all the events from the environment. But what we have discovered through our work with CodeSandbox Projects is that it doesn't matter. Like, for us, the check to see if that event should be handled or not, it's just a tiny check. And when that check is false, the reducer returns the same state and nothing happens in React. So it's insanely fast, and you don't have that many reducers either. And the development experience is so much better because you don't have to tie all this stuff together. It just works out of the box. But the really good thing about having environment events is that you don't have to write asynchronous tests anymore. So when you're writing tests, you can just emit events from the environment. So you're kind of simulating the environment. And the great thing about events is that they can be asynchronous and they can be synchronous. So when they typically are asynchronous when the app is running, when in a test, you can just fire it synchronously. And it really makes your tests better. Okay, now let's see, API. So this is the API is that you have this create reducer. So that's what I talked about. This is the one thing you want to do. And you can just do that and not do anything more with this. But then you can go in and you can define an environment, and I'll show you how that works. And then there are like the state effects, some utilities, some type utilities, and the dev tools. And just to show you, this is React states. This is the core of it. You go and use, instead of like creating a function that takes state and an action, you use this create reducer factory where you have state, action, optionally a command. You create a type for it. You create an explicit return type for the handlers called a transition. And then you define it, and that's everything. And then you use that reducer with a normal React use reducer, and you're done. So that means like if you have a reducer like a counter, like increment decrement, you wouldn't use this kind of reducer. There's no need for it. But as complexity increases and the reducer starts hiding these explicit states, it's time to, you can get benefits of this. And especially if you're going to do side effects and stuff, then it's a huge benefit to do this, because then you can just do dispatching, and then it's up to this reducer to decide when to run those side effects. Okay, so I'm not going to go through any more documentation, but I thought we could well, let me commit this first. Add video, commit and push. Cool. So let's see. So we have this Excalibur project. Where are you? Excalibur Firebase. It pops up twice because I have it on my personal and the CodeSandbox team. And I think we can just add a new branch here. And we're actually going to... Oh yeah, actually I think the name is going to... I forgot to mention that. We're going to publish it through CodeSandbox, so it might have a completely different name. And I think the reason it was React states is that you like... when there's like a single state, that is kind of an indication that that you don't need it. Like there is only a single state in the reducer, so you don't really need this. While states indicates that, okay, the reducer can be in multiple states, which is the indication of you actually needing, or it will be helpful with such a tool. So that's kind of the initial reasoning, but I think it will just have some weird name when it's published. Let's see. Okay, so we'll open this in VS Code. Yes, trust. And then the first thing we are going to do is yarn add React states next. Naming packages is hard. Like first thing you have to do is you have to go on npm and search, and typically someone has the name already, and typically someone has named the package. Like you find this really good name for a package, and then someone uses it, and you feel that your package is more worthy of that name. And actually, I have on a couple of occasions where it's like just like a dead name or a dead package, I've asked to get it, and a couple of times I've actually gotten it. So that is definitely possible. Let's see. Okay, so now we have that thing, and it's not like a huge change here, though it's a little bit of a change. So the way it was typically done is that we define this environment interface, and it's quite simple in this application, where we have per like a piece of the environment, API of the environment, we have like a folder which then defines, in this case, like browser. I have a browser and a test environment here, and then the specific typing there. The convention that I'm using now is that I'm rather more explicit about having an environment interface which holds the typing. So I would put, let's see. Oh, what did I do now? Then you should be in there. There we go. So what we'll do is that we'll copy this over here, and then we'll still, yeah, and this is the thing, like now I don't need, I could of course have a folder for each piece of the interface, but I don't need to anymore. I can rather say authentication, and here's the interface for the authentication. And what I'm going to do is that I'm not going to have a subscription there anymore. And instead of calling it action, I'm going to call it an event. This is also has been resolved now, because this was also tricky. Like initially it was called events, but then we moved to action, because it's like in a reducer you kind of receive actions, but some of them are events as well. So especially when you define this yourself. So let's say you're doing some data fetching. So you create one action to change the reducer into a loading state. And then you do some promise, and then you, when that promise resolves, you have an action that says something like data fetching success. But that's not really an action, that's an event. It just, the first one was like, I tell the reducer now to go into a loading state. But the other one was like, oh, this event happened, it was actually a success. You're not saying add data to the reducer, which is fascinating. But when you have this separation of the environment and the reducer, everything from the environment is just the environment saying that something happened in the environment. And then all the actions you actually define on the reducer, they are actually actions. So it has these, it cleans up some concepts, at least in my head, it cleans up some concepts. Okay, so we have the event and we have the actual interface, so that's good. And then we need to do the same for copy image to clipboard. Copy image to clipboard. And that wasn't much. It only has that thing, and then it doesn't have any events. And then we have Loom. I'm not sure if anyone's actually using this. It's to more easily, like Loom has this new browser thing now where you can record Loom videos. In the browser, and it was in beta, so I was testing it for them. We never had that session actually. We're supposed to have a session. Anyways, and then it's storage, and we can remove this thing, and then this is storage event, and we don't have that subscription anymore. Cool. So now what we can do is, yeah, I guess we have to restart the TS server. And we don't, yeah, so one type we're going to environment event, and this is now authentication event. Or it's, well, copy image to clipboard didn't have any, but it's a storage event from storage, or it's a Loom event from Loom. So that's the environment event. And then instead of create environment, we're going to use define environment. And define environment takes the environment, and it takes the environment event, like that. And then we have some more stuff going on here. Create reducer, use reducer. Let's expose all of them. Let's see, I don't think I have prettier in there now. Let's see. Prettier. Install. There we go. Oh yeah, so we are. React States is, so the thing about React States is we wanted to take advantage of state machines in the new CodeSandbox projects because we had issues in CodeSandbox version 1 with managing all the complexity of the state, and also typing. Had a huge issue with typing. There were insane amounts of checks everywhere, where it was difficult to reason about why we were making those checks. Like what kind of state were we trying to express by checking all these values, if they were there or not. But we weren't sure how we wanted to take advantage of it in CodeSandbox projects. So we started at a very fundamental level of using this idea from the video of having just a reducer expressed as the different states and so on. And now, like, we've done this for a year, and we just had a session where we talked about our learnings. And what I'm showing now is kind of where we are at with those learnings. And we made some other discoveries in terms of patterns and stuff, but the most important thing now is kind of to nail the core concept and API and think about it as just a tool and not a framework. Because that's the thing, it was moving very much back and forward between a tool and a framework through our explorations. So this is going to be published as a CodeSandbox open source project. When it comes to type and interface, like sometimes you have to express it as a type, like here. And then, so that's kind of my rule is if you have to express it as a type, then you express it as a type. If you can express it as an interface, you express it as an interface. And I don't, like I never use interfaces in the terms of like, very rarely. Like an interface, you can extend it and stuff like that. I rarely use that functionality. So it's, and there are like other reasons for using interface as well in terms of how TypeScript actually evaluates them and stuff, but I don't think about that. So I try to default to interface, and then if it has to be a type, it's a type. Cool. So now we have, this is our environment definition. You'd see there's absolutely no implementation here. It's just defining the different things that the application needs. And we have our events, we have the API surface at the top of the environment, and then we have a provider to offer this environment. We have the hook to use the environment. And we also have the possibility to create different implementations of this environment. So in this case, as I said, we have browser and test. Interface, shape, and types can be combined. Well, you mean shape and types? Oh, you mean, interface. Yeah, interfaces and types can be combined. Yeah, exactly. Like to me, types is like way more flexible. So for me, I could just use types because they are more flexible. And as you say, if there's an interface, you can just punch that into a type if you want to do that. So it would be where you really want to, like, for example, you want to use an interface with a class, for example. Maybe that's the reason. Like, I rarely write classes, so interfaces isn't like in front of mind that much because I don't use them to implement classes and so on. So like the benefits kind of, there's even a pattern in TypeScript where you can do like a mix-in kind of thing with classes, which is interesting. I built a proof of concept around that once. Where you depend on interfaces to make that mix-in concept work. So there are definitely use cases for interfaces. And I guess it's like what people are used to from other languages as well. It seems that like yeah, everyone I meet, they try to default to interfaces, and I just don't have a strong argument for doing that. It's more like, okay, I just have to make a decision. Let's see. Yes, and then we can create an implementation of this environment, and we can create a reducer which has the typing. So when we create reducer, we actually get all the events from the environment, and when we use the reducer, it will actually automatically hook into the environment, and it will receive all the events from the environment. So I'll show you how that works. But first we have to change this into, let's see, first we can delete all these ones. Delete. And delete. I don't think I have that many tests here. I think that's my biggest thing. And even though I even like build testing frameworks, but when it comes to it, like in practice, I don't write as many tests as I should. I guess that's the story for most people, but I'm very fascinated is maybe the wrong word, but I'm very happy to see, like, meet developers who are really consistent about writing tests, and it's like it's just a way of programming. And but I guess I kind of have this, and it's completely unfair, I think, but for me, like, writing tests is the opposite of being creative. So I have like two modes of operation. If I know what I'm going to build, I love like the feeling I have writing tests first and then implementing. I love that feeling. Like, it gets me into the zone. It's just a wonderful way to do programming. But when I don't know what I'm building, I'm just exploring a concept. If I constantly have to like write the tests after, because I don't quite know exactly what test I should write until I see how it works, then I really hate it. Then it takes me out of the flow of figuring out what I'm trying to build. So that's why when I work on personal projects, I re-implement stuff. I explore first, go all the way, and then I can go back and implement it again in a more test-driven way. But when you work at a company, you typically don't have time for that. So what happens is that you do the exploration at the best of your ability, and then it works, right? And then you ship it. But that's kind of, at CodeSandbox, that's been the story of last year, because we like that's literally what we were doing last year. We didn't know exactly what we were building. There was a ton of exploration, not only related to this, but the product in itself. And then we had to like ship it. We had to give something to the public. But now we're not working with deadlines anymore. We are working with milestones and goals, which is now tied to the public release. And now it's about like doing things right, taking feedback from the users, making it stable, and so on and so on. So it's a very different mode of operation where we'll have more time to write tests and stuff. Let's see. So we'll delete this, and what we're going to do here instead is that we're going to call it environments. And oh shit, yeah, what's kind of nice about this is that when I'm using VS Code on CodeSandbox Projects, it actually automatically saves when I jump between the files here. I just kind of have to visit them. There we go. Let's close all of them. So now we have everything under environments. And what we rather do here is that these are the explicit implementations of the two environments I'm using in this project, which is the browser and the test environment. And then what we do is that we import the create environment from the environment interface. So this is really nice. Now, all the typing and everything is in environment interface. And whenever you need to expose something new, you go and type it first. And then you have this separate thing to actually implement it. So here we would export an environment and we will create that environment. And this environment now has the typing, where you see it has an emitter for the environment events, and then it expects to have authentication, loom, and storage here. So what we're going to do is that we're first going to, I think we call it create authentication. Now the thing is that create authentication currently doesn't take this should be from the environment interface. Wasn't that it? Environment interface. Let's see. Oh, come on. Let's just do this. VS Code, help me out there. That's slow. I guess it should be down 2-1. There we go. Rename. Well, we shouldn't need this anymore, because what we're going to do instead here, we are going to say when we call create authentication, we're going to get this emitter from the environment, which has the emit type. And in this case, even though this emitter allows you to send any environment event, we're just going to send the ones related to authentication. And what we're doing here is that we're just going to search for subscription dot, and we're going to replace that with nothing. So now we just emit and we don't send a subscription out there. So that's basically the change now, is that we're not creating an explicit like event emitter for every API in the interface. We're just having this generic emitter as part of the environment, and we just shove stuff out there. So that's the authentication, and then the browser doesn't use... what was this? Oh yeah. So that's pretty simple. Environment interface. We don't need the loom action anymore. We'll do the same here. We'll have this emitter of loom event. And then we can just emit, let's see, subscription dot. Cool. So this is, so here you can see what's interesting also about this is then we are getting initializers out of the box here. So one thing is in the browser here, I could do it like this instead, and then return. So that means that I get space here to do initialization for the whole environment, which means I could, for example, make this, for example, create browser environment. Oops. And then I can make that a callback. I could give it some options that I can use when we initialize the environment. In this case, I don't need that. But still, I could initialize stuff here and then create authentication, and now we pass the emitter in there. And then for each API, they also have their own initializer where they then return the API. And this, I really like this pattern of initializing because you put it where it should be. So in this case, you can see when I create authentication, I just immediately go and register the authentication change stuff, which will does the emitting of any events related to that. And then I actually return the API surface to be used by the application. So you kind of get behavior just by creating the environment stuff. Anyways, so we have copy image to create, copy image to clipboard. We have Loom, create Loom from browser. This also needed the emitter. And then we have storage, create storage. And that also needed the emitter, I think. Oh, we didn't do anything about that? Oh, we forgot to do that. Environment interface. Don't have to do that thing. Where's the create storage? Oops. Emit storage event. And now we have a bunch of this dot subscription dot, and we don't need that. Whoop. Oh, interesting. Did I do something wrong? Storage event. Get change data. Don't need that one. Oh, maybe didn't I type it correctly? Oh. Ah, interesting. Let's see what's wrong with this one. ID does not exist. What did I do? What did I do? Oh, maybe it's missing. Oh, it's, yeah. You know, I don't like storage is a bad type to use because it's a native type. Even storage event is a native type. So I have to change my convention there. Anyways, so what we resulted in now is that we have this folder called environment interface, which is just defining the environment in terms of typing. And then we have the environments folder, which is the implementation of the different, I'm not going to create the test thing now, which is the implementation of a specific environment, here in this case the browser. And then we can go and take a look at where we expose the environment, which I think is in, where the hell do I do that? Dashboard? Yeah, I can't remember. Main. Yeah. So instead of grabbing the environment provider from environments, we grab it from the environment interface because it's agnostic to what kind of environment we're going to shove in here. And then instead of doing all of this, we're just going to import the environment from environments browser like this. Yeah, and for some reason I have to put show here. We don't need this anymore. Yeah. Okay. So that's basically like the change related to the environment, is to be more explicit about what is the interface and what is the implementation. And then what we're going to do now is that we're going to change the features so that they actually use the reducer from the environment. So for example, the auth feature, we don't need to use the subscription. We don't even need to use the dev tools. Environment interface. So we're going to use environment and create reducer and use reducer from the environment interface instead. And what that enables us to do is that the reducer will be typed with all the environment events. And when I use reducer from the environment interface, it will automatically bind that reducer to a subscription to the event emitter, and it will also attach it to the dev tools. So we and that's really nice now, because now, as I said, we don't have to tie the environment events to the reducer anymore. It's a really nice separation. So we don't need this concept of like a public action and all that stuff. We can just name it action, because any event coming from the environment, you don't want to manually send those from the outside, right? It's just coming from the environment. So from the outside, when you dispatch into the reducer, there aren't any environment events typed there, because they kind of come in from behind, kind of. So we just need action here. We have our, this is actually using the latest stuff. So as you can see, we still have, so here we can see we have all the environment events. Whatever we need to handle, we have it here. Because that's also something we experience, is that even though we have a clear separation in our environment of different responsibilities, when you create a reducer, it might want to consume maybe even 3 different things from the environment, and then you have to bind it all together. But here you just get everything, so it's much easier to implement the reducer. Oh, good thing. Good. I'll have all the typing here, and then this use reducer from the environment actually takes a name, because that's related to the dev tools. Don't have to check that anymore. Don't have to use subscription anymore. Yes. So that cleans up a bit. So that's basically the change, is that in this application, I have chosen to use this concept of features, which is basically context providers. So that's also something that maybe we can, we'll see until my partner yells at me, but let's just move ahead here. And what we also discovered is in CodeSandbox Projects, we also have like a features folder, and it's even separate from the app itself, because we had ideas around reusing the features across different applications and stuff. But that was a very premature choice. So the point is that you don't need to put all of this stuff on a context provider, because at the end of the day, it's just a reducer. And it's better to just expose that reducer as part of your components. And then if you see that you start with a lot of props passing and stuff like that, or you have to move that reducer to a spot in the component tree where it doesn't really belong, but it has to be there to cover all the children components that needs access to it, then you can also evaluate if you want to use a context provider. But yeah, so what we did is like we always defaulted to a context provider. We created this features concept, and it's just not necessary, because it's just a reducer that we're exposing. But what we'll do here first is that we'll just refactor these, and then we can see how we can move things a little bit more. Environment interface. We don't need storage action. We use environment is coming from the environment interface, and we just do the same thing. Create reducer, use reducer. So in this case, the concept of the features is that you're implementing the functionality, the logic, in a headless manner. So they don't care about UI. You can think of them as like being an application in itself. And so it's a complete separation of UI and logic. And you can test all these features in isolation without thinking about UI at all, which you have examples of here. We're just giving it the reducer, and then we're able to start testing the environment. What is fetch previews being called on the environment? And then we emit an event from the environment, and then we check if the state of the dashboard has changed to what we want it to be. So the boundaries of these tests is like you're testing if the if the context provider is interacting correctly with the environment and dealing with events and everything. Yeah, you could think of it, yeah, kind of like a library. There's no UI considerations there at all. But that's also a thing, is just reflecting on this now, is having that very clear separation is, on one hand, it's nice because you can write these really efficient tests without having to test the UI. But you could argue that you should also verify that the UI is presented correctly related to this. Which is also why we, in CodeSandbox projects, we are going to move a lot of these context providers back into the normal component tree with the UI, and rather make them context providers where needed. Yes. So yeah. So, because like one of my big explorations also with Overmind was like, what does the world look like, or what's the developer experience if you develop an application without having to think about the UI? And in Overmind you have like the dev tools where you could actually like see everything. It was kind of like a state browser, so you could implement stuff, you would see it pop up in the dev tools. And you didn't build any UI, but you could interact with it and see the state change and all that stuff. Hi.
Kan du åpne denne for meg? Fordi jeg skal dra på sykkelshopping akkurat nå.
Skal dere nå? Ja, så koselig. Ja.
Jeg fikk lov av mamma.
Så koselig. Oi. Så. Bare hyggelig. Må du ha en fin tur?
Nei, men jeg må gjøre det her oppe, fordi jeg klarer ikke å lukke.
Ok. Jeg holder på å spille video, jeg skjønner det.
Ja, jeg sitter her og venter.
Gjør det. Where was I? Yeah, so it's more the mental model. It's not saying anything is like more correct than the other. But it's a way to think about implementation. It's like having a separation of concern between logic and UI. Where was I? Dashboard. Yeah, let's finish this one. So we don't have storage action. We don't call it public. It's just, oh, sorry. Yeah, we don't call this public either. It's just a feature. State. Oh, yeah. So it states any here. I don't think it should be any. Should be never. Yeah, because if I do never, then it's, yeah, I think I need to change this. I have to make the action optional. Let's make a note of that. Maybe we could even fix it right away. Let's see. DevTools. So in this states type, where are you? States. Yeah, I'll check that later, but you should be able to not type this as any, because then I think you can do like any kind of, and you might get an error, like somebody has really strict rules on the typing, not allowing any, one of them being us. So I need to change that. Where should I note that so I don't forget? Okay, I'll try to make a mental note. Anyways, so now this one is almost done. We pass in, what was it? Dashboard. And we don't have to do this anymore. We don't have to do this anymore. And there we go. That's much nicer. Yeah, we'll have to fix the tests later. Let's just get through these things. Don't need dev tools. Yeah, and you see this? I even have a typo on new subscription. Oh. Use reducer. create a reducer. Oh, reducer? Where's reducer coming from? Oh, it's its own, sorry. Let's go over there first. Reducer. Environment, interface, storage. Oh, a lot of stuff I'm not using here. Anyways, blah blah blah. I think this is good. Because the types, are they? No, they aren't. Okay. We don't need this. So we have our state here. We have the command. We can rename this to action. Yeah, interestingly enough, I have something called a private action here. So we are actually going to keep that. So there's one, since this is a context provider, there's one action that is not supposed to be used from any consuming components. And that is the sync action. This is triggered from within the context provider. So that is why I create two different features in this case. One that is public, the typing of the actual context value. And then I have what's called a feature, which is the typing of the reducer itself. Cool. So here we go, and we say excalidraw. Don't need this, we don't need this. And I guess we don't need this, and we don't need this either. Oh yeah, split even this into effects. Yep, that should be fine. Yeah, so maybe this is a little bit, this is quite simple stuff now. I could move this into, I don't have to, I think I was just exploring how to, what would it look like if I were to move that into their own things. So here we actually do have const state at least. Yeah. And we also have dispatch. So one thing, if you have been following along with this stuff, you might wonder what the command thing is. So one thing, you will also find that in other reducer, like there are other solutions to making the reducer act as a state machine. And they also typically have a concept of commands. Because the thing is, like, as you can see here, we have like use state effect. And use state effect means just that whenever the reducer moves into a loading state, go and do this thing. But sometimes you want to run these effects unrelated to moving into a new state. And in that case, you return a command instead. So that means that we are still in the same state, but we just want to run this side effect. So that is what a command is. The nice thing about state effects is that you can, when you move out of that state, you can dispose. So for example, when I'm loading, I want to subscribe to something. And then whenever I move out of the loading state, I stop subscribing to that thing. While the command effect is just something that runs. It's unrelated to any changes, so it doesn't have like a disposer. You can even do things like you can have multiple states here. So whenever you enter one of these states, you start, for example, a subscription. And when you move to a state unrelated to one of these states, you're kind of moving away from that context again, then it disposes. But it can move in between these states without disposing that subscription, for example. Yes, so it's all driven by the state changes within the reducer. Let's see, yeah, we don't need these ones anymore. Cool. Yeah, because this isn't that much. And then we have navigation. let's do the same here. No subscription, use reducer, nothing here. Create reducer. Oh yeah, we don't need that anymore. And not that either. So we have our states. We have our action. We don't need that public feature anymore. We have the thingy, it's using the events, and we just say feature here. And this reducer should have the name of navigation. No DevTools, that happens automatically, nothing there. And then we made a boo-boo. What's the boo-boo? Auth. Oh, yes. So what's also been changed is that, do we have the auth feature? So when you want to use the utility types, that's why we have this. That's why we have these states. I think I'm going to rename. Yeah, I have to write this down. Let's see. So there are two mental notes. Fix the any typing of an action if you don't, or make actions optional, and also change this to states reducer, because you don't really know what is this actually. What is this typing? But as you can see, it's the return type from a states from use reducer, which is a confusing thing with React. Like, what is the thing that's returned from use reducer? It's not really the reducer. It's like the API of the reducer. But I think it's actually typed as reducer. I'm not sure. But I need to find a name that kind of reflects that it's the return type of use reducer. Anyways. What were we doing? Yes. So the thing is that we use this type with the utility type. So if you want to pick like a specific state, an action, a command, or you want to define like handlers outside of the reducer and stuff like that, it always uses this single type. Which makes things more approachable. But we have to actually, as auth feature. Let's do that, auth feature. So here we can now pick state auth feature. And what we're saying here is that this navigation feature needs to receive the authentication in the authenticated state. That's a requirement. So this is a really nice way to say that this context provider or this component actually cares about this reducer, but only when it's in this specific state, which just again makes things more predictable and explicit. So it's not like traditionally you would just give it all the state of the reducer and it would have to do all the checks, like, do I care about this value, this value, this value? But now you're explicit about saying that, oh, this is when it's authenticated. I know I have a user when it's authenticated. Okay, so that's the navigation, and then we have recording. No loom action. We're going to use reducer in the. So the point is that if I didn't use this environment, if I just wanted to make a state machine reducer, I wouldn't do all this environment stuff. I would just use reducer from React, and I would do create reducer from React states. Let's see. We don't need Bloom action, we don't need that public feature. We just say feature. And this would be recording. Don't need this, don't need this. Cool. And then we have user dashboard. Can't even remember what this stuff is. And again, we use reducer and create reducer from here. Let's call this action. Yeah. This will be feature. This will be, what was it? User dashboard. Don't need this, don't need this. Cool. So that's basically it. Let's just remove. Let's remove that. Well, we don't have to remove it, but let's see if it even runs now. No, it doesn't run yet. Excalibur canvas. Let's see, pages, Excalibur. Yes, this needs to be an interface. Oh, I'm using, oh, interesting. Yeah, I remember this now. So here we have to do a use effect instead, because I'm manually using the subscription here now. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm using the Excalibur library, and let's see. We have to use the emitter here directly. Emitter subscribe. We don't need to do that. Oh. Yeah, I'm using the emitter directly because I don't want to go by React. I don't want to put this data update in React because it messes up the reconciliation of Excalibur. I just want, every time I get an Excalibur data update, I just want to go straight into Excalibur and update the data there, which then triggers a change, which then updates. Yeah, because I had issues with collaboration when I didn't do that. Let's see how we are now. Now it's Excalibur preview. Interface. Yeah, and it's just really nice now to see that, okay, if I'm interested in one of the types, it's always the environment interface I'm looking at, not the... I'm never pointing, like that's the thing, I never point to any specific environment. I always point to the interface, which reflects the agnosticness of the environment, which I think is a really good thing. Oh, interesting. Oh, this is actually using the... I didn't know that. Create reducer, use reducer. Yeah, the Excalibur preview is like an in-component state machine, if that's even a term. Let's do any there again. And then, yeah, this is nice because now we can do we're doing this, and now we can actually name this. We can say preview Xcali draw preview, and then we want this to be a separate let's see, metadata ID. Yeah, so we use the ID of the Xcali draw to, like the DevTools will show different previews. And I guess we don't need a thingy there. Okay, how do you feel now? Oh, Vite is, let's see. And let me try to restart first and see if it works. Need some caching in Vite. Yeah. Oh, no Firebase. Oh. Why does it say that? Oh, interesting. Okay. So I do want to, because this is actually using the, yeah, you know what? I'm actually going to change this because this is also nice. Because now I'm actually moving all this stuff, all Firebase related stuff. I'm moving that into the specific environment that's actually using it. So if we do environment browser here, as I talked about, we're going to, well, we're not going to do this, but we are actually, well, first of all, we're going to import what we need. And then we're going to initialize the Firebase app from within here. And now we're good. So this is really nice. Like we're even cleaning up that kind of stuff where I used to like mix browser specific implementations with the app, but now it's like completely clean. The only thing that's like not clean now is that I'm always, so if I were to, where's the pages? If I were to main, so if I were to like mount main in a test, for example, it will still like load up the browser, but I can make that dynamic if I want to do that. Anyways, don't care about that now. Let's see if I can sign in here. See if it actually works. It's running. Yeah, this is nice. And here we can see, oh, we can even see one of them had an error. And like, as you can see, it actually receives all the events, where in this case, it was matching on a specific one. And one thing I don't quite understand, I'm going to remove this now, because this was running in strict mode. And with strict mode, React will kind of rerun all the effects, and I don't quite understand how that can work. Because if you have like animations and stuff inside use effect, it will actually rerun multiple times. I understand what strict mode does. Like it's to make sure that what's it called? Non-deterministic or deterministic. Like it's the same thing. It doesn't matter like how many times. Like when you run the same time, the same thing multiple times, the output should be the same. But when it does that, it like so the app works. It's just the dev tools that doesn't handle this very well. So I wonder if there's a way to detect if it's like yeah, if there's a way to detect it. Anyways, Yeah, this is also interesting. Why are all these considered okay? Yeah, it just says that it can't find the image, which is perfectly fine. But yeah, I haven't tested this. Because this should be like the ID here. That's interesting. VLBX ID. Yeah, you see this is a different ID. So I wonder why. Yeah, it's probably the dev tool. I haven't really tested this scenario where you kind of have the same component. Yeah, anyways, doesn't matter. I'll look into that. So that's 3 things. Let's filter out everything. So here you can see we're starting in checking authentication. Yeah, and maybe filter ignored should actually be on by default. Okay, this is getting becoming a lot of stuff. Where should I write this down? I'll just write it down in the main thing here. So we talked about optional action in states, rename states to reflect being a return type of use reducer. We talked about always on filter actions and weird behavior on same component, different versions, logging actions, and also like possible to identify strict mode. Because I would expect the same thing to happen with like Redux DevTools. That it would, yeah, rerun the action and rerun this. Yeah, but they don't actually give a, yeah, they also give a history of state changes. Yeah, it's funny to me. Oh, but I think actually, yeah, I'm not sure. There's something fishy about it. Oh, this is interesting. So, assignable to type never. Oh, auth feature. This should be auth feature. There we go. Now you should be happy. And the same here. Pick state, auth feature. There you are. Okay, so we have it running, which is great. And what I'll do in the meantime, I'll clean up the notes. And then what we're going to do next time is that we're going to move. So this Excalibur project is open source, and I want it to be a reference. So I'm going to, yeah, clean up the notes. I'll do another session where we'll actually go through and remove the concept of features. It's just going to be reducers. So where it makes sense, we're going to make a context providers, and we'll just call it providers or something. And where it doesn't make sense to be a provider, we're going to just make it part of one of the components. Just to emphasize that this is not like a framework, it's just a tool. And then we need to fix the tests, because that's also one thing I want to fix. It's you see here we have this thing called render reducer, but we could really call it test reducer, because it's not really about rendering it. It's about, well, it kind of renders it technically, but what you get back is the return result of use reducer. Yeah, and we could even, yeah, use, yeah, we should use test reducer or something. We can actually simplify. Let's add that as well. Where is it? Was it the main page? Main, change render reducer to be more explicit testing. reducer. Yes. Cool. Also show tests with UI. Because the thing is, like, if you look at the tests here, they're actually super nice. So this is what I meant about... Oh, yeah, we need to update this. But the thing is, this is what I meant about testing the reducers in... Yeah, hi, Bogdan. Yeah, I'm back streaming. It's nice to be back. But yeah, as we can see in the tests here, this should like be use test reducer or something. Not use test reducer, but like test reducer, and you just give it a reducer, because this was also like frameworky based on like having the features concept and all that stuff. But yeah, we don't want that. But what you can see here is that I am just testing the reducer and giving it the test environment. And then since it's like a provider, we have to give it a provider. But that's not necessarily the case, that we need this provider and stuff. We want to be able to just test the reducer. Yeah. And this is interesting, because this is... Yeah, what is this actually? Is it... Yeah, so this is kind of testing the reducer as a hook. Yeah, I'll have to reflect on that. No matter. The thing is that you just get state and dispatch back here. And as you can see, since we're using the environment interface with events, we can test the whole thing completely synchronous. So I'm firing up the authentication feature, and then I'm simulating that the environment is saying that we got authenticated. And I'm doing that synchronously. And then I'm just expecting that the state should now be authenticated with information about the user. And then it should be unauthenticated when it's not logged in. And I just do the same thing. I simulate that the environment says that you're unauthenticated and that we actually move to unauthenticated. And then when we sign in, I want to make sure that we move to authenticated. So I start in the unauthenticated state. I dispatch to the reducer that I want to sign in, as like a user interaction. I'm checking that the reducer goes into a signing in state, and I'm verifying that the test environment, the test environment, the authentication in the test environment is being called. Is the reducer, or like the context provider, is it actually calling sign in? And it is. And then I check, then I simulate that the environment has a successful authenticated. And then I check that I'm authenticated. So you can see all this complexity of, I'm starting in an initial explicit state. I'm simulating that the user is signing in. I'm checking that it's moving to the correct state, that it's calling the environment interface, and I'm simulating that we're authenticated, and then checking that we actually move to the correct authenticated state. And all this is completely synchronous. No mocking of fetch or anything like that. It's very clean. And this is why interfaces are super, super nice. And yeah, if I'm ever going to do like a talk on React, again, I'm going to talk about not this specifically, this thing we're talking about here, but just environment interfaces, because it's not even tied to React. It's just a good way to do programming, so that your application doesn't directly use browser APIs and npm packages and stuff. You actually define how your application is going to, like, you define what your application needs, as if you're describing the perfect, as if the environment was designed for, your environment was designed for the application. and then you can put all that complexity in the implementation of the interface. Yeah, that is super nice. But yeah, I'm on Easter vacation, which means we have to clean. I'm going to the basement to clean out some stuff. But this was super nice. I think I'll be able to stream tomorrow as well. So I'll try to fix the stuff that yeah, let's commit this, by the way. Let's see. Refactor. Oh, maybe no, that should be good. Okay, so we'll summer feather. Okay, I'll fix those things, and we can continue tomorrow to, as I said, remove this concept of features, and rather use the reducers more directly to emphasize that this is just a tool. It's not a framework. And then yeah, hopefully we start to see something that can be released and something that we can follow with the CodeSandbox projects, because that's like a much bigger implementation where we fare regressions, making refactors. So, but at least then we have a goal, a reference. That's going to be nice. Nicely nice. Cool. Yeah, thanks so much. Hopefully this was useful. I kind of jumped a little bit right into it. If you didn't know anything about React states from before, it might have been a bit weird. But I would encourage you to go to, if you're more interested in it, like watch the video on like what's the reason for React states, what's the principles, and then yeah, look at the README. Because there you have the value propositions and some documentation. And yeah, feel free to test it. But this React states repo is temporary. It's where I kind of just shove changes in as I see the need. And when we have like a proper release candidate, we'll move it into the CodeSandbox repo and publish it from there, probably under a different name. Cool. Yes, this was fun. I'm having a hard time quitting. But yeah, I'll hopefully talk to you tomorrow. Bye for now.